Hi, I'm Teja. I'm a developer relations engineer at Harness. In this video, we're going to learn about how you could govern the usage of open source components in your software delivery process using Harness SCS. What I mean by governance is your software would utilize a lot of open source components, and when it comes to the usage of open source, you would definitely want to avoid using certain libraries or specific versions of those libraries that could be malicious, or they could just be against your organization policies or legal compliance, etc. And similarly with the licenses, you would definitely want to avoid a certain list of licenses that could put you in trouble. And now, how can you bring governance over this whole process, especially in a large scale? So this is where the Harness SCS comes with SBOM policy enforcement feature. This is an OPA-based policy as code approach where you clearly define the rules with an allow list and a deny list using the Rego language, where the rules can include details about the components, whether you want to allow it or deny it, their versions, including the licenses, supplier, Perl, etc. And then these rules comprising a policy set can then be enforced on the SBOM of your software. Those rules in the policies are evaluated against each component in your software, and a detailed list of violations are generated. You can also configure whether you want to terminate the pipeline on violation or just give a warning and continue. So this is how the policy enforcement happens. And there's another part, which is the attestation verification, which is part of the SBOM orchestration process. So before enforcing the policies on the SBOM, the step will first verify the attestation that was generated from the SBOM orchestration step. And it requires a public key for the verification process. You can learn more about the SBOM generation and orchestration from the video in the description. So, on successful verification of the attestation from the artifact registry, the policy enforcement takes place on the SBOM, which we have just explored. So now, let's take a look into the implementation and the whole process. So what you see on screen is an existing Harness pipeline, which has two stages, the build and a deploy. So in the build stage, we have the SBOM orchestration already configured in the execution section. So which means that before you apply the SBOM policy enforcement, it is important that your artifacts have gone through the SBOM orchestration process. If not in this pipeline, it can be in any other pipelines that your artifacts have gone through the SBOM orchestration process. One is that, another is where you need policies to enforce. So let us just quickly look into it. So as you just add a new step, you'll get to know where we'll be adding them. So you can just search for SBOM. You have the SBOM policy enforcement here. You can just click on that, and right up here you have all the options that are needed for performing the enforcement, and you have the artifact source, and here a verify attestation on optional thing. In case you have added the SBOM attestation in the orchestration process, you would need a public key to perform the attestation verification, which you have just seen in the slide. So if you have not added any sort of attestation, you can just skip this. And for you to understand the orchestration process, you can refer to a dedicated video on SBOM orchestration or the docs related to generation and attestation process. And next, this is where you have the policy configuration. This is where you give the policy sets that you have created so that this step enforces those policies, executes, and gives you the policy violations. Alright, so this is pretty much needed. So let's go ahead and create a policy and a policy set and come back here and then configure this SBOM policy enforcement step. So let's close this. You can just discard, and I can also close this. And now you have to go to the policies in the project setup. So I'm going to go ahead and create policies and policy sets in the project level. You can also create the policies in the account level or org level too. In my project, I'm going to go to project setup, and under I have policies right up here. Since I do not have any policies and policy sets, I'm going to go through the onboarding process. But you can also close this and start from fresh. Here you are. You can go for policies. You don't have any policies here. So let me start a new policy here. So I'm going to name this as SBOM policy enforcement, and I'm going to put it as inline and apply. Here I have a list of all the templates which is in my library. So you have a policy library where you can pick some of this and use it for your purpose. So I'm going to choose SBOM allow and deny list. You also have a dedicated allow list and deny list separately. You can go for allow list and deny list as well. So you can just click on that, and once you have that, you'll get a preview of the template where you have a deny list in it. And you can see that I wanted to avoid having curl with a specific version, and then log4j. And then if you go down, you also have the specific licenses that you wanted to avoid, and then you have a version of it, and you're also avoiding or denying the supplier or Perl specifically. And now this is all the deny list part, and you also have an allow list here. So this is where you have an allow list with the license that you wanted to allow, which is MIT, and you have a couple of other things here. So this is how you create a policy. And you can also use IDA here. The Harness IDA allows you to write policies effectively. And then pretty much once you're done having your policy configured, I'm going to use this template straight away and see how it goes. So I'm going to say use this sample, and right here you can also test it, but I'm going to go ahead and save it. So the policy is saved. If I go back, I can see there is a policy in my policy section which is just created, the SBOM policy enforcement. So next step is where we have to create a policy set. So for that, you go for the policy sets and then create a new policy set, and let's name it as SBOM enforcement. And then the entity type of this policy set applies to, you should choose SBOM here, and then on step you can just continue. And here you have to add the policies into this policy set. So click on add a policy, and this is the policy that we have just created. You can just add it. And also this is where you configure on violations whether you wanted to warn and continue the pipeline, which means on violations the pipeline will just warn you saying that there are some violations and continues the execution. If you choose error and exit, it will just terminate the pipeline on any violations. So I'm going to go choose warning continue for now, so that it only shows us the warning and continues the pipeline. And then you can just say apply and finish. So there you go. We have successfully created a policy and a policy set. Let's go back to our pipeline and then configure this. And this is our pipeline. Here we are in the build stage execution. Let's add the step again. Go to SBOM enforcement, and here we are. So you can just remove this and say the source for me is Docker Hub. You can choose ECR, ACR, JCR repository, and moving forward, Harness will support further and furthermore. And the container registry, in my case, my container registry here, and the image with the tag. So the next is verify attestation section. Since I have configured the SBOM attestation process in my orchestration step, I need to give a public key so that the attestation verification happens first before the policy enforcement. If you have not configured the attestation process, you can skip it. So the public key I can choose from the Harness secrets. And there you go. So this is where we're going to configure our policy sets. So you can just click on add or modify policy sets. And now you can see in my project level, I can see SBOM enforcement. So this is the one we have just created. So you can just apply, and there you go. Now apply changes. So yeah, we have SBOM orchestration and the SBOM enforcement. So this is in the build stage, and you can also do the same in the deploy stage. You can just get into the deploy stage, and for you to do the SBOM enforcement here, you need to have a step group. You can just click on add a step group, and then just say SCA and enter container based execution, and then apply changes. So inside this, you can add the step. So you can search for SBOM policy enforcement and configure the same, right? So better you have this SBOM policy enforcement right before the deployment. So I'm going to skip this here in the deploy stage. We will look at this in the build stage for the demo purpose. So discard, you can remove this step group and go to the build stage, save and run, and then run the pipeline. So here we are in the pipeline execution. So it will take a couple of minutes to complete the pipeline execution. So after fast forwarding, so here we are after the successful execution. So the pipeline had done three things: initialization, and then you have the SBOM orchestration process, and then we have the SBOM policy enforcement. Here you can see a warning that the policy enforcement resulted in policy violations. So in order to see these policy violations, you can quickly get into the supply chain tab in the pipeline execution window here. You can just get into the supply chain tab, and right from there, you should be able to see your artifact, which is this. And I can see the SBOM and drift analysis in this section. And then next to it, I have the policy violations dedicated for it. But I can see the build stage. In the build stage, I have this SBOM policy enforcement step, in which I have 637 LO list violations and 75 TNA list violations clearly. To view all of them, you can just click on view policy violations, and this brings up all the data which was involved in the violation. So this is how you can govern the use of open source components in your software delivery process. And the whole process is where you have your SBOMs for your artifacts or your software, and then you have the policies created. Now you use SSCA step, the policy enforcement step, to enforce these policies to view all the violations. And based on the conditional of the policy sets, you can either exit or terminate the pipeline, or you just give a warning and continue the execution. So that's pretty much it. You can learn more about SBOM policy enforcement in Harness documentation. Thank you.